So there are many supervillains in the Insomniac Spider-Man games, and they're a lot of fun to fight and defeat. But the biggest villain has very little screen time, and you never really get to fight them head on. I mean, at all. I speak, of course, about Norman Osborn, the snake in the grass who looks like he's just a mere mayor of New York City, but is actually the one responsible for the vast majority of death and destruction in the game series so far. I mean, pretty much all of it, quite frankly. See, in the first game, he created Mr. Negative by illegally experimenting on children. And though he saved the child's life and gave him superpowers, the problem is that when these powers manifested, he killed his parents. Now, this was not the child's fault, of course, as he had no control and no knowledge of the fact that he would get superpowers. No, it was fully Norman's fault. And this led to the child leading a life dedicated to destroying Norman Osborn. And so, because of Osborn's actions, Mr. Negative creates a gang of demons, mind controls a lot of people, and kills even more people. And sure, it was his decision to become a terrorist, and it was his decision to detonate bombs in central New York City. But Norman started him on this track with his recklessness. And in the case of Otto Octavius, Norman not only started him on this path with his unethical experiments, but he is the reason the two broke apart and that Octavius struck out on his own. And then he decided to abuse his powers as mayor to shut down Octavius's research and take away his grant money, leaving him broke. All of which was designed to manipulate him to come running to Oscorp so that he could control his inventions. Because, let's be honest, Otto Octavius was a goddamn genius.
This isn't about safety infractions, is it?
I'm trying to help you, Otto. You're free to continue your work in a secure environment.
At Oscorp.
You always were the smartest guy in the room.
You haven't changed a bit.
But of course, this all led to Otto taking a very different route, getting money from suspicious sources and engaging in dangerous technology that fried his brain just a little bit.
If we're not careful, an intracranial implant could make things even worse. Even alter his personality. We need to proceed carefully.
And amplified his anger. So although he was justifiably angry at Norman, this little bit of technology was amplifying that up to 100. So when Norman took credit on TV for stopping Mr. Negative, which was a total lie, I mean, as I just said, he actually created Mr. Negative, well, all of this was just too much for Octavius to bear. He could not stand Norman getting praised for all the bad things he'd done. And so he became the supervillain Doc Ock and broke a load of other supervillains out of prison in order to form the Sinister Six. But that's not all. On top of all of that, Norman Osborn also created an illegal chemical that could potentially cure a lot of illnesses, that's true, but in its current form, it is one of the deadliest viruses on the planet, and he never should have been working on this in the middle of a dense population like New York City, especially considering he had absolutely zero permission to do so because it is insanely illegal. I mean, we're talking war crime illegal. And of course, had Norman gone through the proper channels, or at the very least done this research far away from people, then Doc Ock would not have been able to get a hold of it so easily and use it to infect thousands and to kill God alone knows how many people. And one of those people in particular was of course Aunt May, which was a particularly painful moment for Peter Parker and for us as the audience. And that's just the things he's responsible for in the first game. In the second game, we learned that it was Norman Osborn's people searching for a meteorite that led to Kurt Connors losing his arm.
Shoot it off!
Do it!
And thus to the creation of the lizard. After all, Kurt Connors only created the formula that turned him into the lizard in an attempt to regrow his lost limb. So far, he's given birth to 3 major supervillains. But of course, all of this pales in comparison to the fact that he turned his own son into Venom. I mean, yeah, sure, he was trying to find a way to cure Harry of his disease, but it seems like Norman's good intentions only seem to lead to the destruction of others' lives. And although this symbiote does save Spider-Man's life, it also brings about an alien invasion, turning thousands of people into semi-mindless slave soldiers, and even turning Mary Jane into Scream, who nearly kills Peter Parker. So Norman Osborn created Mr. Negative, Doc Ock, the Lizard, Venom, Scream, and by proxy he made the Demon Gang and the Symbiote Army. So really, Norman is easily the biggest villain of the series, having made 5 supervillains and a deadly virus that devastated New York City. And this may be intentional on the writer's part, as Norman Osborn is of course the Green Goblin in the comics, whom is considered to be Spider-Man's arch-nemesis, because they're clearly building to something in the 3rd game. It has after all been rumoured that the Goblin King series is going to be adapted in the next Spider-Man game, which means Norman Osborn will become the Green Goblin and thus the Goblin King, which is also something we've been anticipating for a while. After all, in the first game, Mary Jane finds the Green Goblin mask and the Green Goblin grenades in Norman's apartment, so it was a very obvious nod to the fact that he's going to be using those in the future against Spider-Man. And of course, when you combine this with the fact that at the end of Spider-Man 2, we see that Norman is clearly teaming up with Doc Ock, well, that shows us that he is 100% going to be a supervillain in every sense in Spider-Man 3, and we'll finally get to see that smug face of his punched. I mean, in that first game, I really did just want to see him get punched. But anyway, I think this does show that he is the real villain of the series, and he hasn't even put on a costume yet. So God alone knows what destruction he's going to cause when he does. But what do you think? Are there more things in the games that Norman Osborn is responsible for that I haven't mentioned? And how do you think his role in the 3rd game will go? Personally, I think it's pretty sure that he's going to become the Green Goblin and break Doc Ock out of prison, and then the two of them team up. Also, possibly something with Harry's going to happen that's similar, because he was getting injected with an experimental serum to bring him out of his coma. So it seems likely he might have some sort of psychotic break and become one of the goblins as well. He has done this in the comics and in other shows in the past. Though really what I'm curious about is to see what Doc Ock has planned for the final showdown. In the comics, he put his mind in Spider-Man's body and became the superior Spider-Man, though eventually Peter gets his body back and Doc Ock clones Peter to make himself a new body. Now, that could happen in the game, but it does seem a bit too much for the game series, to be honest. I mean, let's be honest, it is a bit out there as plots go, at least for a mainstream game like this, though it could be interesting if they did choose to adapt it. But still, I imagine they're going to go in a different direction. And personally, I would love for them to go the Spider Island route, with Doc Ock figuring out how to make more Spider-Men, or rather how to create a chemical to infect people with Spider-Man powers that then later turns them into monsters. I mean, that could be a lot of fun. But let us know what your thoughts are on this in the comments, and of course if you have any theories on future game plots. And I'd just like to quickly remind everyone that we have some merchandise available on our store, and to say thanks to all of you who have donated to the Needle Mouse Productions page on Patreon. And as always, thanks for watching, and feel free to subscribe, share, like, and comment.